Hello, and welcome back to the World of Wysteria. We will now conclude Chapter 33 with Part 3. Now, said Jeremy, once the girls had left, where were we? Actually, two different subjects had been left hanging, each concerning one of the mystery females in his life. Well, said Will, deciding he'd rather finish their discussion about Iris, hoping to finally get an answer to his question, before hearing what Jeremy had to say about Lily. You were explaining why Iris... Ah, yes, Jeremy broke in. Why you had never seen Iris as the Iris you've met here. Yes, he replied. You had just said that the waking world, like this world, is within her range. But I have not lost sight of your question, said Jeremy, which was encouraging to hear. But there are two issues here. What she can do, and why that is so, and what, in this case, she chooses to do. The former involves her nature as a goddess. The latter has to do with her role as your guardian. I have been addressing the first issue, for it's important that you understand the nature of otherworldly beings. But this is a complicated subject, and for you, the clock is ticking. Everything you've been telling me has been enlightening, Will told him, and I do want to understand these things. So, if you think it's necessary to give me more information first... Jeremy smiled. Such a discussion might fill many of your nights, he replied. I imagine we would stray far from your question before returning to it. But we will have other occasions to speak. Will was afraid that he meant to end their conversation and leave. But after a short pause, Jeremy resumed. Beings acting as guardian angels have the ability to appear in various guises, he said. However, except in extraordinary cases, the form they take will be consistent with the world they enter, consistent with the structure of that world. Simply put, though Iris may intervene on your behalf, she will do so as unobtrusively as possible. Here, for example, in Wysteria, Iris can take the shape of a woman, one of the many citizens who populate the town. Her appearance and presence here causes little, if any, disruption to the overall fabric of the world, which is determined by you, by your mind alone. Not absolutely, but for the sake of this discussion. However, though your waking world is also a creation, a product of intentional minds actualizing particular possibilities, it is not solely your creation. The waking world is a complex, interdependent structure created and sustained by many minds. Or, perhaps more precisely, by a many-layered collective mind of which you are a part. For her to appear in that world as a woman would be miraculous. But couldn't she enter and exit in a way that no one would notice? Will asked. There are minds other than humans involved, said Jeremy. But it goes far beyond that. It's not simply a matter of someone, human or otherwise, seeing her suddenly and inexplicably appear. Although anything in any world is possible, in the waking world, it would be unnatural, meaning highly improbable, for her to be there at all. Her presence as a woman would be unaccounted for. In that form, as a physical creature. She would have no history there, no organic connection to the rest of the world. This stone, for instance, he said, tapping his foot on the floor. In the waking world, it would once have been a part of a larger rock, perhaps a mountain, itself formed many ages ago, and it would have been cut to the shape by someone, a particular person, who was born and raised by parents, two individuals who were themselves born before that. Ultimately, we could trace the history of this stone and the mason, along with the history of all things, including yours, back to the formation of the universe. In such a world, even a brief, relatively unnoticed appearance by Iris would challenge the established order of things. She could do it if she chose to, but it would take energy, and there would be consequences. It is different here. Things are not so rigidly interconnected by a shared past. Though Wysteria has a structure of its own, it is far more flexible. As we have seen, you are able to alter parts of your world without causing the entire configuration to unravel. And yet, even for you, it's still a challenge to make certain changes, changes that defy the clear and present reality of this place. You must account for these alterations. You must convince yourself that they are at least plausible. From what you've described, her appearance was, for the most part, compatible with your world. That is, she appeared in a form and a manner that you and your world could easily accept. Consider her most recent intervention, the touch you felt during the battle in the square. Will thought for a second. She was invisible, he replied. Yes, said Jeremy. If you had been alone, it might have been different. Had you turned and seen a woman standing there, you would have been surprised, but it wouldn't have been inexplicable. You would have assumed she'd been able to sneak up on you without you noticing. However, others were there, other minds that would have seen her appearance as clearly unnatural. Her identity, as well as her interference, would have been revealed as otherworldly. But what about Alicia? Will ask. What about her? The way she appeared to me, and Emily, he said. There was nothing natural about that. No, said Jeremy. That was indeed miraculous. But your nymph belongs to a different species, and she plays a very different role here. Is she a more powerful being? No, Jeremy answered, but power is not the issue. Whatever their kind, beings who act as guardian angels wish to be anonymous. That is the nature of their role, not necessarily the nature of their species, although, generally speaking, the gods and goddesses, beings who span a multitude of dimensions, will keep their intervention to a minimum. For the same reason, we'll ask, because they don't want to disrupt our reality? In part, at least, Jeremy replied. For even those deities who have little care for lower life forms still find them valuable and, therefore, have a self-interest in keeping their worlds from collapsing. Even Eris? Yes, said Jeremy. Even she who feeds on chaos must take care not to over-harvest. A hunter may have no compassion for the creatures he consumes as food, yet he still has an interest in preserving the species and, therefore, its environment. Otherwise, though he may feast today, he will starve tomorrow. And the gods have unlimited tomorrows. In addition, the gods and goddesses are constrained by the reluctance to infringe on each other's territory, to thwart the will of another deity. When invited, a goddess may have free reign in one man's world, such as Nathan's. But many deities, both true and lesser, operate within the waking world, where even a subtle intervention may have far-reaching effects and create unintended conflicts. Jeremy paused here, giving Will a chance to soak in his explanation. "I think I understand," he said tentatively. "The general idea, at least." "But," said Jeremy, "well, why can Alicia show herself as she wants to?" he asked. "And not just to me, but to Emily as well. Does she not care if her appearance upsets things here?" "Did it?" Jeremy asked in reply. "I'm sorry," said Will, confused by his question. Jeremy then turned and looked at the falls. "Did witnessing this miracle upset your world?" Will now understood what he was saying, but wasn't sure how to answer. "Only you would know," Jeremy continued, "but I would guess not. It was a blessing. Nymphs are shy creatures, hesitant to reveal themselves, content to be what they are, with little interest in the world outside of the places they inhabit. You are given this gift, this divine vision, because she trusts you. She feels the love that you have for this, your creation, into which she has been born. And thus, she feels your love for her." Will knew what he said was true. This is what he'd felt during the experience: love and joy. Nothing disconcerting, nothing that threw his world out of balance. Perhaps she'd only revealed a deeper layer of his reality to him. Are there creatures like her in the waking world?" Will asked him. "Nymphs and fairies, beings that inhabit natural features, rivers, lakes, forests?" "Of course," Jeremy answered. "In one form or another, these spirits fill every world. And yes, as you may be wondering, they will sometimes show themselves, not to interfere with the world or the fates of those within it, but to return the love felt for them, to express their love to those who see the beauty, who sense the divine in their earthly forms. The few who witness these occurrences are blessed indeed, for such encounters are rare." "Because these beings are shy?" he asked. "Yes," said Jeremy in a subdued voice. "They must be coaxed. They must be worshipped. For what is worship but abandoning oneself to love? This is what inspires their desire to appear. Love provides not only the motivation, but also the means. It takes both a strong will and a tremendous amount of energy to bring about this corporeal manifestation. And love is the source of that energy." Though Will's mind was swimming with questions, he decided to set them aside until he'd had time to digest all that Jeremy had told him. He'd learned much, and had gotten many answers, important ones. But before the girls returned and put a hold on their conversation, if not an end to it, there was another issue, another ongoing mystery that Will wanted Jeremy to address. You mentioned that you had some thoughts about Lily, he said, hoping Jeremy would take it from there. Ah, yes, Jeremy responded. She came to our aid again, attacking that beast in the square, Will noted. Is she another guardian angel in disguise? No, he replied. She wears no disguise. She is the woman you see. Not an otherworldly being, then. Jeremy then turned and faced him. How do you feel about her? He asked. Well, she seems at home here, said Will. But how do you feel toward her? He interrupted, rephrasing his question. Jeremy waited a moment for Will to answer. Then, getting no response but a bewildered look, he tried again. What do you feel for her? Will now understood. He thought about the day he met her, their embrace, their kiss, the longing in her eyes. It's hard to describe, he said, blushing as he cast his eyes downward. Yes, said Jeremy knowingly. It is clear she loves you, passionately. Will started to protest, but Jeremy quickly silenced him with a wave of his hand. It is clear, he said, with authority. Lily told me that she was with me before I could remember, said Will. Jeremy smiled and nodded. Yes, I believe that is true. So, like Iris, she was with me in the waking world, he asked. No, Will, he said. Quite unlike Iris. This is the only world in which she resides. Which meant she could not be a goddess of any sort. Nor could she be a dreamer, if this were her only home. But if she somehow predated Wysteria, then what is she, Will asked? Where did she come from? She came with you, said Jeremy. Not from the waking world, though, but from your earlier, transitory dreams. The realms formed in ordinary dreams have no stability, no constancy, and tend to evaporate as soon as we leave those worlds. They fade, as does our memory of them. But, though fleeting, they are creations, and sometimes fragments linger. When I first saw Lily, she did seem familiar, as if I knew her from somewhere, Will told him. And then, when I held her, it felt as if you had held her before. Yes, but not in the waking world, Jeremy proffered. Will shook his head. No, he said, I would have remembered. And you have, said Jeremy. She was lost to your conscious mind, but a part of you has not forgotten. Though the realms in which you were together dissolved, she remained. How is that possible? Will asked. Where would she go? I can only guess that she drifted in the world between worlds, Jeremy replied. Dormant, a disembodied spirit, re-emerging and returning to you in your dreams. But for this to happen, for her existence to continue, your emotional attachment to her must have been strong, She left your mind, but never your heart. It was your love for her that kept her from passing away. The energy was strong enough to give her an independent existence. You gave her the breath of life. Will now understood, in his mind and in his heart. And once I created Wysteria, he asked. Jeremy smiled. You gave her a home, he answered. And that concludes chapter 33. And we'll return soon with chapter 34.